Morning, everyone. I'm Tom Holmes and founding director of Varan Performance, and I'm joined today by our AI and automation lead, Elie Homan. Morning, Elie. Great to see you.
Morning.
I'm very excited about you coming on today because you are our RPA and automation lead of our team. So we haven't spoken for a while on these topics, but I think we are ready for an update on automation, etc. So this webinar today is designed for people who have a basic understanding of automation and may have attended one or more of our introductory webinars in the past. People who want to gain buy-in and investment for automation programs and projects and activities, and for people who already have some automation in place and want to get more value from that technology. So for everyone who doesn't know us, Brand Performance and why we're running these webinars, I'm just going to run through that. So we are a consultancy that helps businesses transform their HR and finance services and solve their business challenges by improving HR, finance, data, processes, and technology. We are entirely technology agnostic, so we help to select and implement whatever technology works best for you and your organization and our clients' organizations. Since we were founded 8 years ago, we've helped many businesses to move to the cloud, systems like Workday, SuccessFactors, Oracle, and also non-ERP solutions that may be quicker and cheaper to implement. And one of these, the main one at the moment, is actually robotic process automation, which Elie is going to talk about today. And we'll discuss automation more broadly as well, looking at other tools beyond RPA, such as ServiceNow, chatbots, dashboards, and predictive analytics as well, which in some cases, and in many cases now, are the most cost-effective and effective way to improve HR and finance processes and services. So why are we here today talking about automation? This pandemic and our sudden need to work remotely has exposed for many businesses real risks and weaknesses in their HR and finance technology. Yet, many businesses have paused their major programs to reform and improve this, or are struggling to secure investment for those major programs, etc. So getting those systems working in a smaller way, getting the automation which joins up current systems which we may already have or need to rely on for longer than we might otherwise have needed to, is actually critical, and RPA is exactly in that space. So at Varan, we've trained over 20 of our team members in automation, in robotic process automation, in ServiceNow, and all these other tools. And we started that process several years ago because this method, automation, we see as the fastest, most cost-effective way and efficient way to improve HR and finance in the post-COVID world. So Elie, can you run us through what we're going to be talking about today?
Of course, Tom. I'm going to take a look at an RPA use case, and I'll show you how robotic processes can easily be adapted to meet changing business needs. Then we'll lift the lid on how clever building of robotic processes can make them really simple to repurpose and save you some money on future automations. And finally, we'll widen our focus and we'll look more broadly at automation tools. We'll discuss how to approach building out your automation roadmap, and we'll acknowledge where RPA fits in with all of that. So that part of the session is the bit that it will be particularly helpful for anyone who's already got some degree of automation deployed within HR and finance, and you might want to know, what do we do next?
Brilliant. So a webinar in 3 acts. So please submit during the presentation any questions or answers on the chat bot and the Q&A box in the bottom right of your screen, and I'll be picking those up as we go and presenting them to Elie as she takes us through her thoughts and her experience of RPA. So over to you, Elie.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So before I kick off, I thought it would be a good idea to quickly recap what we mean by automation. So we've covered this in previous webinars. I'm not going to go into detail, but basically we're talking about technology that assists or completes a process with little or no human assistance. So the spectrum is a really broad one for automation. You can have your simple rule-based processes like RPA that we're going to touch on today, and you might have workflows right the way up to intelligent solutions that can do predictive analytics. So today we'll be focusing on the specific area of robotic process automation. I'm going to call it RPA for the rest of the session, and it is not intelligent. So those of you who attend a lot of automation-centric webinars, you'll know that there are the key areas on the screen now. These are ones that we look for to identify processes that are prime for RPA and automation more generally. So you might want to keep these in mind as I discuss the use case, so that you can relate them to your own challenges within your own processes. And from my experiences deploying RPA, I wanted to share some of the benefits that are often overlooked, but are blatantly obvious to a developer. And that is namely the reusability and the adaptability of the technology. And we need to highlight these because they're really critical for business cases. And we need to bring together what the technology teams know and what your business strategy is, so that that value add can be captured in your business case. So let us start by looking at a use case within HR. I'll touch on the benefits delivered, and then we'll look at how it can be adapted to handle, shall we say, unforeseen circumstances. And that's just code for COVID-19. So what was the challenge? The use case we're going to focus on centralizes around an HR shared inbox, and this ticks all the boxes for an RPA-like process. It's rule-based, there's a high volume, low-value tasks, and it's very repetitive. And the inbox receives form submissions for items like training requests, family leave request forms, season ticket loan requests, but it does occasionally get ad hoc queries which require a little extra thought, and they add a little extra value too. The team that managed the inbox, they were faced with no efficient way to prioritize items, and they had to read every submission in order to figure out what the best course of action would be. And they found that basically they were struggling to clear items and there was quite a backlog. So how did RPA come in to fix this? So 2 robots joined the team, and they improved the process to allow the staff to focus on the value add ad hoc inquiries rather than all the forms and the admin heavy tasks. So the first robot we've got there in orange, they constantly monitored the inbox, and for every new item they would check if they recognized any of the forms attached before tagging the email with the category that it fell into. So that might be, this one's an ad hoc manual query, or this one's a season ticket loan request. And robot 2 would pick up on the work passed to it by robot 1, and that would be any forms that needed validating, and it would pass those on and respond to the appropriate senders. So that could also include letting them know any mistakes that they had made and that it was actually an invalid form. And it might also mean keying that data into a downstream system, provided it was valid. So what were some of the benefits of this process? So benefits in general of this kind of automation include a complete reduction in human error for everything that gets handled by a robot. And that will result in improved data in downstream systems, because there is no, you've had it validated in the first instance and it's met your rules that you were expecting. And then that just gets taken exactly as it was and put into your system. There's no room for a person to misinterpret the information or wrongly key data. And there was also a significant reduction in processing time. Now that was thanks to the robot completing the validation and the data entry on forms. So the average time of one process to complete were reduced by 80%. And that in turn has a positive knock-on effect for the average response time, not just for things processed by a robot, but also for anything that's coming in that's an ad hoc query, because those items can be focused on by the people. They don't have to sift through all of the other items in the inbox. Based on the expected volumes of this particular use case, it was anticipated that there would be roughly a 70% reduction in manual effort. However, this kind of thing obviously gets impacted should there be an increased number of ad hoc inquiries that would need manually managing. Luckily, you can easily track what's going on within a robotic process and log the kinds of inputs that you're getting. So if we suddenly noticed a spike in queries, we might look to adapt our process to meet the changing business needs.
Interesting. So Ellie, we've got a question in from one of the viewers, which is how long did it take to implement these robots?
So that is a how long is a piece of string kind of question. But for this kind of thing, I would imagine that there would have been analysis that took place before, and that would be relatively quick. So for this process, if we were focusing solely on the inbox to design it, you're looking at maybe 4 to 6 weeks. Because it's got the ad hoc queries. The actual build. Sorry.
No, I was just very interested in that actually, because in the first slide you talked about there being 2 robots, and is that how one designs RPA, with large numbers of robots doing small tasks, or are we better to be thinking about a single robot doing lots of different things? What's the better technique?
I wouldn't like to say that one is better than the other. It's sort of like when you do a painting of, a piece of fruit, someone will do it differently each time. The reason it has been designed in that way in this case is that the inbox, you want to know what's coming in 24/7. So there is one robot that focuses just on saying, what have we got? And that means that if something comes in while the form is being processed, it's not its problem. It can say, oh, that's actually an ad hoc one. Person, go and do that. Whereas if it was one robot doing everything, it would notice that forms come in, go away, it would manage that form, and then it would have to come back. And in that time, you could have had ad hoc queries coming in that could be manually processed, and you're not noticing them any faster. So it's almost a technique to really drive down those times and have one robot focusing on one thing and another on an alternative task to make sure that you're really achieving your benefits. That you could have one that does everything, but you wouldn't be achieving the benefits.
I'm assuming that also impacts our caller's question, because having a robot with a specific task, which is a mini task, is presumably quicker to deploy that robot than if you're designing a longer end-to-end process. So in the example you've been taking us through, where you've done this, the inbox robot is independent of the second robot, and the second robot, as you described, does a particular process. So you could kind of presumably in a few weeks turn on the inbox robot, which separates it out, and you're not dependent upon the second robot processing. You can continue processing manually until you're ready to deploy one for that allowance, one for that allowance, one for that allowance, etc.
Exactly, Tom. Actually, that brings me on really nicely to what I wanted to cover off next. And I think that's a really good thing we can keep in mind as almost a agile way of deploying and building out these tools.
Right.
Yeah, because when I think about building a process, I split them into manageable chunks of activity code that provide the doing, and I think of them as building blocks, actual blocks in my mind. And we put them together and you get your end-to-end process, but each of those blocks carries its own value, and a combination of them might be right to be deployed early so that you can then start achieving those benefits. So if I give you the example of the process we just looked at, and you can sort of see how it all fits together. So we think about also keep in mind adaptability. That's what we're going to cover here, because of new business need. So let's take our inbox process, and we might have a few building blocks that look like this. So we've got read email, save attachment, send email. So in fact, if there will obviously be more blocks that make up our end-to-end process, but if we just had these 3, this could be useful for some of the items we have that maybe come in. We know have a standard response, but they don't have anything that needs to be manually keyed. So for example, something that just said, thank you for your season ticket loan request form. We'll be getting back to you as to the progress of this application. You could have that from these 3 bricks. That's not your end-to-end process yet, but you've done a bit of it. So let's imagine something happens like a global pandemic, and that causes our HR inbox to have to shift.
Presumably something less dramatic than that could also have this impact.
Something far less dramatic, yes. I think it's just because it's quite topical. But yeah, something simple could happen too. That means that your HR inbox is getting an influx of emails that now sit under a new category. So that's the key thing. There's a change in business behavior, and it's impacted our volumes and our process. So we might get given the sign off to extend this process and build it out slightly more. So in this case, we don't have to worry about the cost to build what we've already got, our little building blocks. We just need to worry about the extra blocks and maybe the cement to really glue them all together. So we make sure that the read email brick knew that there might be some new types of emails coming in, but then we'd also build on the move email to an urgent folder. Let's say something relating to COVID means it needs to be manually processed incredibly urgently. Or record inquiry for reporting. So we just want to know how many people are talking about this new pressing issue. So this is a topical example of how you can use existing RPA and adapt it to keep your process achieving the benefits to the right percentage that you're after, remaining relevant, staying valuable, and you've worked with the existing building blocks. So you can also repurpose your RPA activities to meet existing requirements as well.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
So so that means it's pretty adaptable, presumably, both to HR, but you could reuse some of these blocks in other areas as well.
Yeah, so a common area that I get to work in is also finance. And I think from the building blocks we've already got, it's probably quite obvious that you read emails, send emails, and you can save attachments as part of finance as well. They're quite generic. But I think if we carry on thinking in terms of these building blocks, we can start to really understand the cross-functional value that RPA investments can have. Because it's really simple to reuse and repurpose aspects of processes you've already got. And that means that the more processes you have, the more likely it is that you can rework them to fit your needs. And also the cheaper it will be to build a new process anyway. So if we take the HR inbox process as an example, and if we now compare it to a finance business process, such as, let's take the receipt and entry of an AP invoice. So you can really see the value here, particularly with my very obvious colourful blocks. So in this scenario, we might receive a supplier invoice via email, and then our RPA is constantly monitoring that inbox, which will be our yellow brick. It will validate all the invoices, have an existing purchase order. It will save the invoice to the document repository even, and then it will process the invoice and key that information into the system. So you can see the bricks I've got there cover off 3 of those key doing areas, and it is a somewhat simplified way of depicting this because there would be many other blocks, like we haven't got checking that there's a valid PO against this invoice. But what you can see is that there are yellow and purple bricks in both an HR and a finance process. And so for argument's sake, we will have built only 1/3 of the end-to-end process because 2/3 we've just repurposed.
Very good, very good. So can you tell us a bit about this? I mean, I get it. There's an order of doing this. So how do you develop an automation roadmap? And how does RPA fit within this, Elie?
Yeah. So when it comes to back office processes, I'm going to say something controversial potentially. I think that RPA is just a stepping stone for HR and finance. So it's a stepping stone on your journey to optimizing and automating your processes. It's not the end goal. It shouldn't be your end goal. It's a very beneficial technology for bridging any gaps and achieving quick wins. And it's also something that might already be being used within your business. It's quite common to find it in sort of your front of house way of doing things. But establishing a roadmap for automation in HR and finance is really key to understanding how different automation tools like RPA can get you to where you want to be rather than just buying the latest buzzword that's out there and going, oh, we've got this now, what's it really doing? So your technology really needs to support your business process, and it shouldn't dictate your business processes. So what we need here is the business users and any technical owners to really come together and work together on this roadmap. You need to think about what's your future, where are you today, and what is our direction of travel to get to where we want to be. So these steps that I'm going to call out might sound obvious. I really hope that they do sound very obvious and familiar. But often the obvious things are the most important, and also the ones that we overlook the most. So step one, I would ask you, Tom, if you were building a roadmap, what's your end goal? Where do you want to be? And you might tell me some business strategy, some higher up the chain goals that you're trying to achieve. And we take those into account. But we also need to think about HR and finance. Where do they want to be? What culture are they trying to drive? What technologies might support this? So that is your future. And when it comes to finance and HR, your end goal should almost always involve specialist cloud back office solutions. Because they're built for finance and HR needs, and much of what we do is from best practice or legal requirements, or ingrained within our policy. So it doesn't change at a base level very often. And these cloud vendors, they've been at it for a long time. They know the best practice, they know the legal requirements, and they have also started to take on the investment and the risk to develop automation tools within these solutions. So they've embedded that technology like RPA, like chatbots, within what they're providing you. So you get it as an add-on, if you like, fully ready to work with what you've already got. And when you're thinking about that end goal, you might also want to layer that great cloud solution with targeted tools of automation, like specialist candidate screening tools, or even integrated analytics. So that would be my first step. What is our dream and why? What do we need? And then you need to look at where you are today, which is usually quite different to where you want to be. But that should include looking at what systems you already use, who's doing what, and where does your data sit? Is it all in spreadsheets? Is that very efficient? Are people spending a lot of time doing these manual tasks? Because this might make it really clear that today you've got some pain points that need to be in that year 1 or 2, rather than off there in the world of chatbots and everything being done seamlessly. And then obviously step 3 is, how do we get there? So in the image we've got on the screen here now, we've got some tools which are there to achieve the quick wins, and some tools which are part of our long-term strategy, our end goal, that we start to use early to embed them, I guess. So we've got, if we take a look at the orange circles, you can see here that the technology deployed is RPA, circle number 1. And this technology is used by finance, circle number 2, orange circle. And they use it for their invoice processing. So the process that we referenced earlier, they might be using a similar version of that. However, in year 2, a finance system goes live. And this finance system is capable of automated invoice processing. It's got a bit of optical character recognition and all those buzzwords built in. So you can see at orange circle number 4, the finance department can retire their RPA process and shift to utilising the functionality of the finance system. Now, for them as professional users, nothing will have changed because the RPA did it then and the system does it now. But from a technology perspective, everything's now in one place. You haven't got something sitting over the top running it for you. And then if we start to think about what you might have as a future goal, we get an awful lot of people telling us we want a chatbot. And also, most people have problems with users understanding existing policy, or they might have common FAQs that get asked. You can embed the use of chatbots early on to help users understand, what is your policy and what are these things. that are going on. So if we have a look at the red circles now, you can see that red circle number 1, a chatbot has been deployed. But what does that actually mean for the business and for the users? Well, number 2, red circle number 2, this chatbot contains FAQs for policy information and process information. So it's not clever, it's an FAQ bot initially, and it's just there to target that pain point of we don't know what to do. And then we shift as the maturity of the chatbot develops. You can see that by year 3, it can now complete absence tasks. So I'd like to book some annual leave, please. Or I'm off sick. Can you let my manager know? That kind of thing. And it can also do time tracking. So what hours did you work? I did some overtime and I want to log it. And then by year 4, this chatbot has really progressed. It's pretty advanced, and it can now not only do things and respond to questions, but it's also capable of escalating issues to a real person for resolution. So that's sort of the roadmap and how that links back to technology, but also what service is it that you want to be able to provide to your users.
Great. So we've got a question from the audience again, and this is really about the changing landscape you're describing, where finance systems are deployed at different stages, new HR systems, etc. So if you are planning to make changes to those systems, would you be considering deploying RPA in advance, in your view, or would you just wait till those systems are deployed, which could be kind of 18 months ago? So what is there any benefit of doing RPA in a situation where, like all of us, the environment's changing? There's always something coming down the line. So yeah.
I would say that there is value. I wouldn't apply it to every single process that you have in your business, but picking the big hitting ones, those high volume, low value, they're easy enough to automate, and they tend to have some overlap in the building blocks you'd use to make them. We see this quite a lot, so I can reel off a couple that I would definitely do as your big hitters. So we've mentioned invoice processing, that's a good one. Anything where you have a piece of information coming in and someone normally has to manually key that into your system or validate that information. Those kinds of tasks we see a lot in HR and finance, and they have common building blocks, so you can get a lot of value from just targeting those. Because RPA is so quick, it's worth doing, and it also means that those finance professionals or those HR professionals can go and help you on your project for that new system rather than having to do that job.
Right, so these are all kind of large volume repetitive tasks which we find our teams doing on a really regular basis, and your view is don't wait, just get on and put in an automation to solve those as quickly as possible so that those team members can get on with higher value work.
Exactly.
Okay, good. That's really useful. So I think we've talked a lot about the kind of tools you're seeing utilized to deliver that layer of automation. I think we may have covered that off, but what were the main tools you're experiencing?
There are some things I'm quite excited about. I'm more than happy to talk about, Tom. I'm a huge fan of any automation that will improve the experience of an occasional user or make processes less administrative for those professional users. Now, working in HR and finance tech and being familiar with the processes and systems means that quite often we get into a bubble of thinking in terms of modules and processes, and it's easy to forget that a large number of people who interact with that HR service or that finance service, they hardly touch the technology. They don't think in this way. They think in terms of I need to. So I like technologies that can answer those questions, and that is predominantly chatbots. At the moment, I'm seeing a lot of workflow wrapper solutions, I guess we'd call them, like ServiceNow, being deployed to provide a central location for that doing. And they are a great example of a platform that's actually building automation into their offering. So you might remember ServiceNow, it might spring to mind as, oh, that's like IT ticketing. No, they've got loads more functionality within it now. They can do finance things, they can do HR things, they can do workflows. They also have built-in chatbots, knowledge bases to hold all that information. Yeah, so they're building that into their standard offering, and that's something I find quite exciting.
Okay, so that's really interesting. And I imagine that people are getting nervous about job security at the moment. And do you have any experience about managing that concern, and how does that work when you're effectively looking at automation of tasks which people are spending a lot of their time doing? So from a change perspective, how does one manage that challenge of nervousness and actual core fear of this change?
Yeah, my experience in deploying, now this was RPA, so it's not intelligent, but when we were deploying it there, I found the most beneficial way to put people at ease is to just be open and honest and show them the value. Most businesses don't have just enough work and just enough employees. It's usually that there's way too much work, and everyone is swamped. So being honest about why you're trying to achieve this and saying, well, it's because we need to free up some of your time and maybe put you over here. I think that's the best way that I've actually experienced this being managed. And then in terms of, let's say you were deploying a chatbot to answer common questions, you might have people who do that as their job right now, concerned about their futures. But there are materials that need to be collated constantly to keep that chatbot relevant. It's only as smart as what it can learn from and look up. So those individuals and their knowledge and the way they know how to communicate with a business, they're really critical to keeping these tools going. By no means will you have a chatbot that eradicates all contact centers and all teams, because it doesn't work like that. We also have people who prefer to talk to someone and might always veer away from your chatbot. That sort of, I think, just being open and honest would be my best approach to the change.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, great. So is the deployment of more all-encompassing automation tools something we should be looking for at the future? So what's your view of the future of automation, etc.?
I would say that yes, these tools that have lots of functionality and layers within them that we would identify as, oh, that's RPA, that's a chatbot, I definitely think they're things that need to be considered as part of the roadmap. Most medium to large vendors today are starting to incorporate technology like chatbots into their offering. And that usually comes with out-of-the-box functionality. So, you might have you've got your processes all established and you have a chatbot alongside it that out of the box knows how to do your annual leave booking if someone asks, or it knows how to provide a performance rating if someone gives a performance rating that way. In fact, my favorite chatbot of the minute, for now, we'll say, is Oracle's digital assistant. I think it's really cool. They've won me over. It's very clever. It's capable of managing when users go off on a tangent. So they might start doing one task and they go, oh, actually, what is my annual leave balance? And the chatbot will bring them back. So you can do both. It will say, yeah, your annual leave balance is this. Do you still want to book annual leave? Those kinds of things. That in the world of technology is really cool. It's a very, very clever thing that it can do. And if you have, let's say, if you have Oracle Fusion as one of your back office solutions, that will work alongside it already. It's got lots of out-of-the-box functionality that it can offer. But more than that, it's not just a standalone, we only do HR and finance kind of chatbot. You can use it anywhere. If you go on the Hermes website, the chatbot that pops up there, that's an Oracle chatbot. That one's got quite a lot of character and personality. So it's a really fun area and something that should definitely be on your roadmap, because it knits together everything that you're trying to do. HR and finance contain so much data that is integral to your entire business that I quite like having something that knits them all together and works across them all. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? Because you're talking about a plethora of technology which is being generated, a plethora of different tools, and a plethora of different vendors, etc. And so, I guess one of the risks, or one of the things which need to be thought about, is how does one map out and orchestrate all of these different tools together? Because if Oracle are bringing out a digital assistant, no doubt ServiceNow have an equivalent digital assistant. You've probably got a digital assistant you've bought elsewhere. Now, each of those three things are in the estate, but how does one marshal a set of rules? And it's becoming more complicated because of this plethora. In the old days, it would be, we've got one tool which does everything related to that particular function in the business. But you're describing a world in which we're deploying multiple tools to do that same end-to-end process. So, what are your thoughts on that, if it's ever complex?
I think that it will be something that becomes something that we really have to think about as more and more vendors start to incorporate these additional tools into their offering. There are smart ways of making what looks like hundreds of chatbots just appear as one seamlessly. And I think that's the approach we're going to go down, that you'll have a wrapper around your chatbots to keep them all in line. And that's kind of where I see it going. But I would also start to ask questions like we do now. We would say, if someone had 3 HR systems, we'd say, why have you got 3? And ask the same question of your chatbot solutions. Are they delivering anything that's different? Can they not be combined? Which of the technologies is most appropriate for you? I think those kinds of questions, and this is particularly why you need to have your technical SMEs in the room when you're thinking about your roadmap, because you don't want to make more of a mess than you started with, even though it might be a very cool mess that can answer everyone's questions. And I think this is probably my favorite part of the job that I get to do, keeping up to speed and doing research with what's coming out next, what a new release is, and thinking, how will that impact either what I'm doing and implementing now, or what I know I implemented with someone else a while ago? Maybe what should they be doing? It's the kind of thing that you do have to have your finger on the pulse for, because it moves so quickly that you don't want either someone to be missing a great opportunity or be making the wrong decision.
Yes, it is very interesting, because you're talking about an agile environment in our state, and that generally, for people from the IT background, is something which is scary. We end up with reliance upon large numbers of different tools doing different things, and how does one generate governance around those so that the management is central? Of course, the related topic of that is, how does one create a single user experience which is consistent across the whole piece as well? So, and yet these solutions, etc., are unignorable. So there sits a governance and management issue which is new to this territory, or rather, it's new. It hasn't been around for many years. And it's one which we need to rediscover. I guess part of the answer is your description of tools which do more different things, because then you can be saying it is this tool which does all of these things, and you're using it in different configurations in different territories within the business. But it is an interesting problem of how one keeps track of that and how one keeps recording it. So, what does that chatbot do is a very interesting question. How is it documented, and how is it maintained, and how does one change it if one needs to modify or add to it? And I think that, without that turning into an industry in itself. Yeah. So, I do think that's fascinating. So, do you have anything else you want to add on your 3 acts today, Elie?
No, I think we'll call final scene.
Brilliant. Well, I hope that wasn't too overwhelming for anyone in the audience. That brings us to the end of our webinar. hopefully you've learned how to use automation and some of the tips from our expert team. I think what I've learned is that there is a real importance to understanding that roadmap and maintaining that roadmap. And then we've got the corollary of the governance of the way we deploy these tools. And also, I'm loving the idea of stepping stone to greater automation and not an end in itself. So we've run lots of other events and preparing for cloud transformation. I'd like to thank everybody for attending and joining us today, and I hope that you all learned something and found it very useful. I'd like to thank Elie for her insights on these areas, and I hope you all have a great day. Thank you for taking your time out of your day.